Hello, everybody. We're continuing with Romanticism, which, as we saw before, began with the publication of lyrical ballads in 1798, anonymously published by Wordsworth and Coleridge. And now we're continuing. We're going to touch upon the famous later Romantic poets of Byron, Shelley, and Keats. So now, one important thing to do is to take a look at the different timelines as far as the years for the different poets. And Wordsworth and Coleridge were just separated by 2 years, but Wordsworth lived much longer than Coleridge. Now, here's something that's really interesting, everybody. If we take a look at the birth dates for Byron, Shelley, and Keats, they're relatively closely related to each other, but they're much later. And in fact, this is often called the second generation of the Romantic poets. Another nickname that Byron, Shelley, and Keats picked up was the rebel poets. So, again, with the publication of lyrical ballads in 1798, what Wordsworth and Coleridge put forth was their philosophy of this new poetry that was centered upon the common experiences of the common person, rooted in the use of their common language. And in the preface to Lyrical Ballads, Wordsworth gives us his famous definition of poetry, which is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. That spontaneity of just gushing out. As well, you'll remember when we talked about subjectivity, that's when the I in the poem is the poet, right? We saw that with Tintern Abbey. In other words, when Wordsworth said I in Tintern Abbey, he was relating an actual experience that happened to him, right? Then you see that second, the sublime, right? Those feelings of high, lofty thoughts that were mixed in with the feelings of grandeur and awe. How people during this time were taking walking tours, trying to experience the sublime in nature. And we touched upon how Coleridge sought the sublime through drugs with his addiction to laudanum. And then the philosophical movement that became involved with Romanticism of transcendentalism, that you could seek the divine and transcendental moments that would break you free from, the here and now and allow you to transcend into the sublime by going out in nature. And we could experience the divine in nature instead of sitting in church, like had been going on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, or reading scripture. Now, when we get to Byron, Shelley, and Keats, you'll see that their death dates are one after another. And they all die before Wordsworth. So this is what's really interesting, is that Wordsworth and Coleridge started Romanticism, and Wordsworth outlived all the other Romantic poets. Wordsworth really lived to an old age there, 80 years old. So now, Keats dies in 21 of tuberculosis. Then Shelley dies 1822, as well as 1821. He drowns while sailing. And then George Gordon, who's also called Lord Byron, touch upon that in just a few moments. He dies 1824 of a fever. Now, when Byron, Shelley, and Keats all die, within those 2 years of each other, the movement, this Romantic movement that we've been working with, suddenly, boom, it's almost like a door closing with the death of these 3 young poets. And also, tied in here, this is where the Romantic poets get a sense of fatalism because they all died so young. So now, what we can do is move to the current poet, which is George Gordon, also known as Lord Byron. Interesting fact about Lord Byron, he was born with a club foot, And he was very self-conscious of having that club foot. Of course, this is back in the day before any type of corrective braces or surgeries or anything like that. So he just had to live with the club foot and the uncomfortable thought that people were always staring at him, whether they were or not. That was his perception. When he was young, he perceived the title of Lord, and that gave him his seat in the House of Lords, which is one of the two legislative branches in England. England has a bicameral legislature, House of Lords and the House of Commons. So a good way to think about the House of Lords is that it would be like being a senator, but it was based upon birth. Right? So you might be saying to yourself, oh, wow, that sounds a little bit like a royal. Yeah, and it kind of is. But really interesting is that Lord Byron, he embraced liberal causes, and he was always pushing for social reform. So this is one of the things that we talked about in the overview of Romanticism, is that idea of political revolution. And Lord Byron was tied up into this. Now, Lord Byron had an incredibly scandalous personal life. Now, he was very, very handsome. Very handsome. He slept around with a lot of people in London social circles, men and women. He fathered a child with his half-sister. And one of the rumors, which is probably true, is that he spent a year in Venice, Italy, and slept with 250 women in 1 year. Yeah, he was out there. And what's really interesting is that the high society loved to gossip about Lord Byron and, go to these dinner parties and tea parties and stuff, and that's what they would talk about. And so his personal life really started to overshadow what he was doing with his writing. And then tied up into this was in 1812, the publication of Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, which there's the famous quote that it was published, and then literally the next day, Lord Byron woke up and found himself famous. This was a very, very big seller. It was really popular, but it got really bad reviews from the critics, which is not surprising because the critics are really behind as far as the different things go with these literary movements. And Childe Harold's Pilgrimage was to prove incredibly influential. Now, the personal life, the choices that Lord Byron was making, and all the rumors and everything just got to be so big that in order to just have time to write and concentrate on life, he had to leave England. So he left his home country in 1816, and he spent the rest of his life traveling, and he never came back to England. Then in 1824, Byron became involved in the revolutionary cause for independence in Greece. He was there, and out of his own pocket, he was helping to finance the revolutionary cause, and he caught a fever and he died. And that's that bottom right image. That is a painting of Byron on his deathbed. So in the next lecture, we'll continue talking about Lord Byron, specifically looking at the Byronic hero.